A black soldier walked into a Japanese POW camp. What the women did next shocked everyone. April 1945, war-torn Philippines. A wounded American soldier stumbles toward a half-abandoned hospital where 7 Japanese nurses pray for salvation. They could turn him away. They could let him die. Instead, they open their gates. But mercy comes with a price. As gunfire echoes through the jungle, the soldier discovers the enemy officer knows secrets about his missing sister. When Filipino guerrillas arrive demanding blood for blood, the camp becomes a battleground of hate and hope. The walls that once divided them now protect them all. As flames rise and bullets fly, something impossible takes root, a bond stronger than the war that tore them apart. What happens when enemies and as the world burns around them? Will mercy be enough to lead them home? The sun broke through the morning mist like God's gentle finger, touching the broken gates of the small camp. Inside, behind crumbling walls, 7 women moved quietly. They were Japanese nurses and clerks who had been left behind when the army retreated weeks ago. Their hospital was now half empty, with just a few wounded patients remaining. Sister Midori Tanaka knelt before a small wooden cross she had carved herself. Her black hair was pulled tight in a bun, and though she was only 35, worry had etched lines around her eyes. Her shoulders were thin beneath her faded uniform, but her back stayed straight as a pine tree. "Lord, give us strength for one more day," she whispered in Japanese. The other women gathered behind her, their heads bowed. Some wore torn nurse uniforms, others simple cotton dresses that hung loose on their hungry frames. Morning prayers were Sister Midori's way of keeping hope alive. The women needed that hope more than they needed the weak tea made from boiled grass that waited in the kitchen. Nurse Yuki Nakamura, barely 22 with a round face that still held traces of childhood, looked nervously toward the windows. "I heard gunfire again last night," she said after the prayers ended. Fumiko, the oldest at 43, snorted. "The Americans are coming. They'll kill us all." "No," said Midori firmly. "The Emperor would never abandon his people." Keiko, who worked as a clerk, clutched her thin shawl tighter. "The war is ending. Everyone knows it, even if no one will say it." The women fell silent, the only sound being the distant call of tropical birds and the bubbling of water heating over their small fire. Their once proper hospital had become a place of shadows and whispers. They had little food, less medicine, and no news from the outside world except for the thunder of distant bombs and the occasional echo of gunfire. "What will happen to us?" Yuki asked, her voice small, like a child's. Before anyone could answer, Fumiko gasped and pointed toward the window. "Look!" All 7 women rushed to look outside. The morning mist was clearing across the overgrown field that surrounded their camp. From the edge of the jungle, a figure emerged, a man, walking slowly. "American," Keiko whispered, noticing his uniform. "Black as midnight," Fumiko added, her voice shaking with fear. The soldier limped across the field, toward their broken gate. His uniform was torn and dirty. He carried a rifle, but it was slung across his back, not held ready to fire. One of his hands was raised, palm forward. "Is he surrendering? To us?" Yuki wondered aloud. Sister Midori clutched the wooden cross hanging around her neck. "Or is he here to take us prisoner?" The women huddled together at the window, watching the stranger approach. Some whispered prayers. Others reached for kitchen knives, the only weapons they had. "Demon," whispered one. "Angel of death," murmured another. "We must decide," Sister Midori said, her voice steady, even as her hands trembled. "Do we hide or do we face him?" The soldier reached the broken gate and stopped. Up close, they could see blood had dried on his sleeve. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat. His eyes moved slowly, taking in the small hospital building, the clothesline where their few garments hung, the vegetable patch where they grew what little food they had. Sister Midori took a deep breath and stepped outside. She held her cross before her like a shield. The other women hung back in the doorway, ready to run. The soldier looked at her. His eyes were kind, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Water," he said in English, pointing at his canteen. "Please." Then, to everyone's shock, he slowly lowered himself to his knees in the dirt, not like a soldier, but like a man in prayer. Midori took a cautious step forward. "American?" she asked in broken English. He nodded. "Corporal Elijah Booker, United States Army." His voice was deep but gentle. "I mean no harm to you, ladies. I promise before God." The women whispered among themselves. They understood enough English to grasp his words. "He could be lying," Fumiko hissed. Yuki stared at him with wide eyes. "He's hurt." Elijah reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. He held it out towards Sister Midori. "I'm looking for someone. My sister. Her name is Aiko Booker." Midori stepped closer and took the photo. It showed a young Japanese-American woman in a simple dress. "Your sister?" Midori asked, confused. "Yes, ma'am. She's an interpreter. Was sent to this area 3 months ago. Haven't heard from her since." Elijah swayed slightly, clearly fighting to stay conscious. "I got separated from my unit. Been searching camps, asking anyone I can find." Sister Midori studied his face. In Sunday school as a child, she had learned about the Good Samaritan who helped a stranger on the road. Now she was being tested in the same way. "We have not seen this woman," she said, handing back the photo. "But you need help." "Sister," Keiko protested from the doorway. "He's the enemy." "He's a child of God who needs our help," Midori replied firmly. She turned back to Elijah. "Can you walk a little more?" Elijah nodded, though his face was pale beneath his dark skin. He tried to stand, but staggered. Midori turned to the women. "Yuki, Keiko, help him." After a moment's hesitation, the 2 young women came forward. Together, they helped Elijah to his feet. He was tall, towering over them, but he leaned on them gently, careful not to put his full weight on their small frames. "Much obliged," he mumbled as they guided him inside. The first drops of rain began to fall as they crossed the threshold, pattering on the corrugated metal roof. Elijah's rifle was carefully set in the corner, and candles were lit against the growing darkness of the storm. Elijah woke to the soft touch of a cool cloth on his forehead. For a moment, he thought he was back home in Kansas, with his mother tending him during a childhood fever. Then he opened his eyes and saw Nurse Yuki bending over him, her expression a mixture of fear and professional concern. "You sleep long time," she said in halting English. "Fever." Elijah tried to sit up, but pain shot through his left side. He looked down and saw fresh bandages wrapped around his ribs. "You have cuts, and here, bullet graze." Yuki pointed to his arm. The infirmary was small, but clean. 4 empty beds lined one wall. Medical supplies, carefully organized despite their scarcity, filled a shelf. A crucifix hung on the wall, alongside a faded portrait of the emperor. Fumiko stood in the doorway, watching with hard eyes. "My brother died at Bataan," she said flatly. "American prison." Elijah met her gaze. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "Why you help Japanese girl?" Fumiko demanded. "Why you here alone?" Sister Midori entered, carrying a steaming bowl. "Let him rest, Fumiko. Questions can wait." But Elijah shook his head. "No, it's fair to ask." He took a deep breath. "I grew up on a farm in Kansas. My daddy died when I was 10. Mama raised me and my 3 brothers alone. When the war came, I volunteered." "Black soldiers fight for America?" Yuki asked, curiosity overcoming her fear. "Yes, ma'am. Separate units, though. The 93rd Division. They had me fixing radios at supply posts mostly." He winced as he shifted position. 3 days ago, I was with a patrol. We got ambushed. I got separated. Been trying to find my way back ever since." "And your sister?" Midori asked, offering him the bowl of thin rice soup. "Half-sister, actually. Same daddy, different mama. Her mother was Japanese. She grew up in California." Elijah took the soup gratefully. When the war started, they put lots of Japanese Americans in camps. But Aiko volunteered as a translator, thought it might help end the war faster. Fumiko made a skeptical noise. So you desert your unit to find her? No, ma'am, Elijah said firmly. I aim to rejoin my unit as soon as I can. But while I'm lost out here, I figured I might as well look for her. Last letter I got said she was working somewhere near Luzon. Sister Midori watched him carefully. And if we help you, what then? You take us prisoner? Elijah shook his head. I ain't in any position to take anyone prisoner. Far as I'm concerned, we're just people helping each other survive until this war is done. The women exchanged glances. It was a strange idea. Enemy soldiers sitting together, sharing soup. God's mercy begins with a bowl, Sister Midori said softly. She nodded to the others. Feed him, then rest. As they filed out, Elijah called after her. Thank you, sister. Midori paused at the door. Do not thank me yet, Corporal Booker. The war is not over. That evening, the rain continued to fall in sheets. The women gathered in the main room, where Elijah had been moved to a chair. His field radio sat on a crate before him as he carefully adjusted its dials. You can fix? Keiko asked, watching his hands work. Yes, ma'am. Just needs some fine-tuning. His fingers moved with practiced skill, despite their size. Radio was my job back home, too. Worked at the local station after school. The women had drawn closer, their curiosity winning over caution. The radio crackled with static, then caught fragments of voices speaking English. Allied forces advancing. Japanese resistance in the northern. Supply drops scheduled for sector. Elijah looked up at their anxious faces. It's okay. They're just talking about movements far from here. Sister Midori stood by the window, watching the rain. Will they bomb us? She asked quietly. No, ma'am. This place is too small to matter. Besides, from what I'm hearing, the fighting's moving away from this area. A drop of water fell from the ceiling, landing with a plop on the floor. Then another. Yuki hurried to place a bucket under the leak. Roof's seen better days, Elijah observed. Many things have seen better days, Sister Midori replied. Elijah stood up carefully, testing his strength. I reckon I could take a look at that roof tomorrow if the rain stops. Why would you help us? Fumiko asked, still suspicious. Elijah smiled slightly. My mama always said, you sleep under someone's roof, you help keep it from leaking. That night, Elijah showed them how to purify their drinking water by boiling it longer than they had been. He shared his emergency rations. Not much, but the chocolate bar was divided into 7 small pieces, bringing rare smiles. Been going to Mount Olive Baptist Church since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. He looked at the crucifix on the wall. Different churches, same Lord. As they prepared to sleep, the radio suddenly crackled louder. A clear voice broke through the static. This is Allied Pacific Command. Repeat, this is Allied Pacific Command. Breaking news bulletin. Emperor Hirohito is expected to address the Japanese nation. Sources indicate Japan has surrendered. Repeat, Japan has surrendered. The room went silent. The women stared at the radio, then at each other. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others began to weep silently. It's over? Keiko whispered. The emperor would never. Fumiko began, but her voice failed her. Sister Midori closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. When she opened them again, they shone with tears, but also with something else, relief. If it is God's will, she said softly. Elijah watched them, understanding the confusion on their faces. It was the look of people whose world had just turned upside down. Morning came with clearing skies. The women moved about the camp in a daze, whispering among themselves. Some wept openly. Others worked with fierce determination, as if keeping busy could hold back the tide of change. Elijah had slept in the chair, giving the women their privacy in the sleeping quarters. He stood now, stretching carefully, his wounds less painful after a night's rest. Sister Midori approached him, her face composed but her eyes red from weeping. If Japan has surrendered, what happens to us? I reckon Allied forces will come through eventually, Elijah said. Round up any Japanese military, send civilians home when they can. And until then, she asked. Until then, we just need to survive. Elijah spread his map on a crate. The women gathered around, looking at the unfamiliar markings. We're here, he said, pointing to a spot in the central Philippines. Nearest American base I know of is here, about 40 miles south. But there's jungle, rivers, and mountains between. And the bridges were bombed months ago. Keiko pointed to a village marked on the map. This place empty now. Japanese army took all food last year. And here, Yuki added, pointing to another spot, guerrilla fighters. Very dangerous. Sister Midori studied the map. So we are alone. For now, Elijah agreed. But if we can get the radio working better, maybe we can contact an Allied patrol. Let them know you ladies are here, that you need evacuation. They will put us in prison camps, Fumiko said bitterly. Elijah shook his head. Not nurses and civilian women. They'll treat you decent, I promise. How can you be sure? Keiko asked. Because I'll make sure of it, Elijah said simply. I'll tell them how you helped me. How you showed mercy when you could have turned me away. Sister Midori touched the cross at her neck. We must prepare for whatever comes. Food is low, medicine almost gone, and there may be dangers besides hunger. What kind of dangers? Elijah asked. Not all Japanese soldiers have gone. Some hide in jungle. They say surrender is shameful. Midori's voice lowered. And Filipino guerrillas hate Japanese. They suffered much during occupation. Elijah nodded gravely. Then we need to be ready. I'll check the perimeter, see what we can do to secure this place. As he spoke, Yuki burst into the room, her face pale. Sister, come quickly. They followed her to the rear fence of the camp. There, in the soft mud, were fresh footprints. Men's boots, the prints deep and clear. Someone was watching us, Yuki whispered. Last night. In the rain. Elijah knelt to examine the tracks. More than one person. They stood here a while. He pointed to cigarette butts half buried in the mud. Watching the camp. Japanese or American? Keiko asked fearfully. Neither, Elijah said grimly. These are civilian boots. Could be local guerrillas. Or bandits. The women huddled closer together. The joy of peace had lasted less than a day before new fears arose. What do we do? Yuki asked. Sister Midori straightened her back. We trust in God, and we prepare. The noon sun beat down mercilessly. Elijah, together with Yuki and Keiko, walked the perimeter of the small camp. His strength was returning, though he still moved carefully to avoid pulling at his wounds. Fence is weak here, he noted, pointing to a section where the posts had rotted. We should reinforce it if we can find materials. There is wood in old storage shed, Keiko suggested. As they rounded the back corner of the camp, Elijah stopped suddenly. Wait! Fixed to a tree just beyond the fence was a knife. It pinned a piece of paper to the bark. Below it, on the ground, lay a burned Japanese military insignia. Elijah approached cautiously. He pulled the knife free and took the paper. What does it say? Yuki asked, her voice trembling. Elijah handed it to her. The message was written in Japanese. Yuki's face went pale as she read. Traitors die dishonored. Who would leave this? Keiko asked. Elijah turned the knife over in his hands. It's a Japanese military knife. Japanese soldiers? Yuki looked fearfully toward the jungle. But the war is over. Not for everyone, Elijah said grimly. Some men don't know how to stop fighting. They hurried back to the main building, where Sister Midori listened to their report with growing concern. I think I know who it might be, she said after a moment. Lieutenant Shiro Kameda. He commanded a small unit stationed near here. A proud man, very loyal to the Emperor. You think he's still out there with his men? Elijah asked. Sister Midori nodded. They left 2 weeks ago, moving deeper into the jungle. He said they would never surrender. The women began to speak all at once, their voices rising in fear. They will kill us for helping an American. We should run. Where would we go? Sister Midori raised her hands for silence. Please, we must pray for guidance. They knelt in a circle, even Elijah bowing his head as Midori offered a simple prayer for protection and wisdom. When they finished, a sense of calm had returned. We need to secure the camp as best we can, Elijah said. Board up the windows at night. Keep lights low. Take turns keeping watch. Some patients too weak to move, Yuki reminded them. Old man Tanaka cannot walk. Then we stay and protect them, Elijah said firmly. We'll get through this together. He spent the afternoon helping the women move heavy crates to block doorways and reinforce weak spots in the fence. They worked silently, each lost in their own thoughts. As dusk began to fall, casting long shadows across the camp, a faint sound drifted through the trees. Elijah stopped, his head tilted. What is it? Keiko asked. A bugle, Elijah said softly. Japanese army bugle. The mournful notes hung in the air, then faded away. In the silence that followed, Elijah looked at the fearful faces around him. They're regrouping, he whispered, and they know we're here. Inside, by candlelight, Sister Midori opened her Bible. The old book fell open to a familiar page, and she read softly, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Elijah, cleaning his rifle in the corner, added the words he knew by heart. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Their eyes met across the room, a Japanese nun and a black American soldier, finding common ground in ancient words of comfort as danger gathered in the darkness beyond their walls. The lantern cast long shadows on the wall as the group gathered around the small table. Outside, the night was alive with jungle sounds, chirping insects, distant animal calls, and the occasional rustle of leaves. But it was the human dangers they feared most now. We should leave at first light, Fumiko insisted, her bony finger tapping the map. Go north toward Allied lines. Through 20 miles of jungle? Keiko shook her head. We would not survive. And what about the patients? Yuki added. Old Mr. Tanaka cannot walk, and Mrs. Ito's fever returned this morning. The argument had been going for almost an hour. Some wanted to flee into the jungle. Others thought they should stay and wait for rescue. Voices grew louder as fear fueled their words. Sister Midori sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, listening to each woman speak. Elijah stood by the window, keeping watch on the darkness beyond. What about you, American? Fumiko finally asked. What do you say? Elijah turned from the window. His face was serious in the golden lantern light. I can't tell you what to do, but I know I can't leave. Why not? Keiko asked. You could rejoin your unit. Because there are people here who can't walk out, Elijah said simply. My mama raised me better than to abandon folks who need help. His words hung in the air. The women looked at each other, then at the door that led to the small ward where their patients lay. The Lord does not give us more than we can bear, Sister Midori said softly. But sometimes, He asks us to bear much. It would be safer to split up, Fumiko argued. Those who can walk should go. Safer for who? Elijah asked. Alone in the jungle? With rogue soldiers and guerrillas about? No, ma'am. We're safer together. He's right, Yuki said, surprising everyone with her firmness. Together we can defend this place, help each other. One by one, the women nodded. Even Fumiko eventually gave a grudging nod. Then it is decided, Sister Midori said. We stay, we pray, we trust. Elijah helped them make a plan. They would take turns keeping watch. They would conserve food and water. They would listen for the radio each day for news. And they would strengthen their defenses as best they could. As the women prepared for bed, Elijah stepped outside onto the small porch. The rain had started again, a gentle patter on the metal roof. In the distance, thunder rumbled, or perhaps it was artillery fire. He couldn't be sure anymore. He sat down on the steps, his rifle across his knees, and began to clean it methodically. The familiar task soothed him. As he worked, his lips moved in a whisper, singing his mother's favorite hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Lightning flashed across the night sky, briefly illuminating the camp in harsh white light before plunging it back into darkness. Elijah walked the perimeter, the mud sucking at his boots. His wounds ached in the damp air, but he kept moving. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every rustle in the bushes made him raise his rifle, but each time it was only the wind or a small animal scurrying for shelter from the storm. Inside the main building, Sister Midori sat at a small desk, writing by candlelight. Her journal was one of her few personal possessions, a gift from her father when she first joined the nursing order. She dipped her pen and continued, "The stranger who prays like a farmer has brought change to our little camp." The women look to him with hope, even Fumiko, though she tries to hide it. He speaks of his God with the simple faith of a child, yet stands guard like a warrior. I wonder if this is what the apostles were like, ordinary men made extraordinary by circumstance. She paused, watching a moth circle the candle flame. I feel old tonight. The war has taken years from all of us. Yet in the American's eyes, I see something that reminds me of youth. Not innocence, for he has seen too much for that, but possibility, the belief that tomorrow might be better than today. A crack of thunder made her jump, splattering ink across the page. She blotted it carefully and closed the journal as Elijah came back inside, rain dripping from his uniform. "All quiet?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, but I saw shadows at the tree line. They retreated when I looked their way." "Lieutenant Kameda's men?" Elijah shrugged. Could be local villagers. Hard to tell in this rain." Midori offered him a towel. "You should rest. Your wounds need time to heal." "I'll rest when everyone's safe," he said, but he took the towel gratefully. The other women were already asleep, huddled together in the small dormitory for warmth. Only the faintest glow from the embers in the cooking stove provided light. "I made you something," Midori said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small origami crane, carefully folded from a piece of clean bandage paper. For protection, an old tradition. Elijah took it gently, his large hands careful not to crush the delicate creation. "It's beautiful. Thank you. Your sister, Eiko, she would know this tradition?" "Yes, ma'am. Her mother taught her Japanese ways. She used to make paper birds for Christmas ornaments." Midori watched his face soften at the memory. "You miss her very much." "She's the only family I got left now, besides my mama. My brothers." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. War had taken so many sons. "Sleep now," Midori said gently. "I will take the first watch." But Elijah shook his head. "You rest, sister. I'm used to night watch." She didn't argue. As she turned to go, she paused. "Corporal Booker, Elijah, thank you for staying." "Seems to me you're the ones who stayed when you could have turned me away," he replied. Later, as Midori slept, Elijah sat by the radio, its soft static hum the only sound besides the falling rain. The paper crane sat on the table beside his rifle. He didn't know that in the jungle beyond the camp, Lieutenant Kameda and his remaining men were marching through the mud, their faces grim with purpose. Morning came with strange light. The rain had stopped, but instead of the usual golden sunshine, an orange haze filled the sky. Elijah, who had finally dozed off in the early hours, woke with a start. Yuki was shaking him gently. "Elijah-san, come quick." He followed her outside where an acrid smell filled the air. Smoke, not the friendly smoke of cooking fires, but the thick, choking smoke of destruction. "We should look from tower," Yuki said, pointing to the small watchtower at the corner of the camp. It had once been used by guards, back when the place had been a proper military hospital. Elijah nodded, and they climbed the rickety ladder. From the top, they could see for miles across the jungle and fields. In the distance, columns of black smoke rose from what had been small villages. "Oh no," Yuki whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "The people." Elijah's face was grim. Looks like someone's burning villages. Could be retreating Japanese forces not wanting to leave anything for the Allies. Could be guerrillas punishing places they think collaborated with the Japanese. Will they come here next? Yuki asked, her voice small. Before Elijah could answer, Keiko called from below. Someone coming. They scrambled down from the tower. At the front gate, Sister Midori and the others were watching 3 figures approach across the field. 2 elderly women and a small child, maybe 5 years old. Refugees, Elijah said. The small group reached the gate. The older women were supporting each other, their clothes dirty and torn. The child, a little girl, clung to one woman's skirt, her eyes wide with fear. Please, one woman said in Tagalog, the local language. Please help us. They burned our village, took the young men, killed the others. Keiko, who understood some Tagalog, translated for the others. Who did this? Elijah asked. Men in uniform, Japanese. They said traitors must be punished. Sister Midori looked at Elijah. Kameda, she said softly. Elijah nodded. We can't turn them away. Fumiko stepped forward. They could be spies, sent to watch us. They're just scared folks who need help, Elijah said firmly. Same as all of us. Sister Midori had already moved to open the gate. Come, she said to the refugees. You are safe here. The women and child were brought inside. They were given water and what little food could be spared. The little girl, whose name was Lena, sat silently, clutching a small wooden doll. Midori knelt before her. Would you like me to clean your doll? She asked gently. Lena nodded, handing over her treasure. While Midori wiped the soot from the doll's painted face, she spoke softly to the child in a mix of Japanese and simple Tagalog. Later, she found a tin basin and filled it with clean water. May I? She asked the grandmothers, gesturing to Lena and then the water. When they nodded, Midori gently washed the dirt from the child's face and hands. Then, to everyone's surprise, she made the sign of the cross over Lena's forehead with water. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, she said, a blessing for protection. It wasn't a proper baptism, but it was a moment of grace in a world gone mad. Elijah watched from the doorway, touched by the simple ceremony. The moment was broken by Keiko's cry from the watchtower. Someone else coming! Just one person! They rushed outside. In the distance, a lone figure stumbled across the field toward the camp. Even from afar, they could see he was Japanese by his uniform. He dragged something behind him, a sword, a katana. As he came closer, Midori gasped, Lieutenant Kameda! The man was barely staying upright. Blood stained his side, and his face was twisted in pain. Yet still he came, one foot after another, toward their gate. Inside! Everyone inside! Elijah ordered, grabbing his rifle. The women hurried the refugees into the building. Only Sister Midori remained, standing just behind Elijah. He's wounded, she observed. He's dangerous, Elijah countered. He left that knife and threat. Lieutenant Shiro Kameda reached the gate and collapsed against it. His once proud uniform was torn and filthy. Blood seeped through his fingers where he clutched his side. His eyes, fever-bright, fixed on Elijah's rifle. Shoot, American, he said in surprisingly good English. Finish your duty. No more killing, Sister Midori cried out, stepping forward. The war is over. Kameda laughed, a harsh sound that ended in a cough. Blood flecked his lips. War is never over. He slumped forward, his strength finally giving out. The gate, already damaged, gave way under his weight. He fell face first onto the ground inside their camp. We can't help him, Elijah said firmly. He threatened to kill you all for helping me. Sister Midori knelt beside the fallen officer. We help him because he needs help, not because he deserves it. Sister, with all due respect. With all due respect, Corporal Booker, Midori interrupted, her voice suddenly steel. I am still in charge of this hospital, and we do not turn away the wounded. Not even enemies. their eyes locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Elijah lowered his rifle with a sigh. "Yes, ma'am, but he stays tied up for everyone's safety." Together, they dragged the unconscious officer into the infirmary. His wound was serious. Shrapnel embedded in his side, the flesh around it angry and festering. "He needs surgery," Yuki said, examining the wound. "Do what you can," Midori instructed. She turned to Elijah. "You may bind his hands, but not his feet, and not too tight. He's very weak." Elijah used a strip of cloth to secure Kameda's wrists to the bed frame. The officer didn't stir, lost in the depths of fever. "His men could come looking for him," Elijah warned. "Then we pray they do not find us," Midori replied simply. Through the afternoon and into the evening, Yuki and Midori worked to clean Kameda's wound and bring down his fever. The other women kept their distance, fear and anger in their eyes when they looked at the Japanese officer. Elijah kept watch, dividing his attention between the windows and the unconscious man. As darkness fell, Kameda began to mutter in his delirium, words spilling out in a mix of Japanese and English. "Hold the line! No retreat! The Emperor's will! Aiko! Booker!" Elijah froze at the sound of his sister's name. He moved closer to the bed. "What did you say?" he demanded, though Kameda couldn't hear him. "What about Aiko Booker?" Kameda's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with fever. "The girl, translator, pretty girl." His voice faded as he slipped back into unconsciousness. Elijah's hands trembled as he adjusted the bindings on Kameda's wrists. The enemy officer knew something about Aiko, had seen her maybe, and now he might die before Elijah could learn more. "Don't you die on me," Elijah whispered fiercely. "Not until you tell me about my sister." Kameda's fever broke in the early hours of the morning. He woke to find Elijah sitting beside his bed waiting. "Water," Kameda croaked. Elijah helped him drink, then set the cup aside. "You said my sister's name. Aiko Booker. How do you know her?" Kameda's eyes narrowed. "Why should I tell you anything, American?" "Because we saved your life when we could have left you to die," Elijah replied evenly. "And because if you know anything about my sister, I'm begging you to tell me." Something shifted in Kameda's expression. Surprise, perhaps at being begged by an enemy. "The translator," he said after a moment. "Young woman, Japanese face, but American speech. She was with a convoy from Manila 3 months ago. My unit was ordered to escort them to headquarters in the north." Hope flared in Elijah's chest. "What happened to her? Where is she now?" Kameda's face darkened. "We were ambushed. Guerrillas. Many died. I was knocked unconscious. When I woke, the convoy was gone. Vehicles burning. Bodies." He closed his eyes briefly. "I looked for survivors. Found none. Your sister, I do not know. She was gone." "Dead?" Elijah could barely form the word. "I did not find her body," Kameda said. "But there was much confusion. Some may have been taken prisoner. Others may have escaped into jungle." Elijah stood up abruptly and walked to the window. His hands gripped the sill so tightly, his knuckles showed white against his dark skin. He had been holding on to hope for so long, and now it seemed to slip through his fingers like water. "You're lying," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You're just telling me what I want to hear, so we'll keep helping you." "Why would I lie about this?" Kameda asked. "I have no reason to give you hope, American." "Then why come here? Why not die in the jungle with your honor intact?" Kameda was silent for a moment. "My men are dead. All of them. The villagers we thought were hiding weapons, they were not. We found out too late. The guerrillas came. I alone escaped." His voice dropped to a whisper. "There is no honor left for me." Sister Midori entered the room, carrying fresh bandages. She looked from Kameda to Elijah, sensing the tension. "Is all well?" she asked. "He says he knew Aiko," Elijah said. "Says her convoy was ambushed. Says he doesn't know if she's alive or dead." "And you do not believe him?" Midori guessed. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Elijah admitted. "I've been searching for so long." Midori began to change Kameda's bandages. Sometimes the truth comes only after forgiveness. How can I forgive when I don't even know what happened? Elijah demanded. Forgiveness is not for him, Midori said gently. It's for you, so your heart can be free to hear the truth when it comes. Elijah looked at her, then at Kameda. The Japanese officer met his gaze steadily. I will tell you everything I know, Kameda said, but not for your forgiveness. For my honor. Elijah nodded once, then left the room. He walked through the camp and out into the mango grove that stood behind the hospital. There, alone beneath the trees, he knelt in the soft earth. Lord, he whispered, if she's alive, show me how to be worthy to find her. And if she's gone, help me know how to carry that weight. Birds called in the branches above him. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves. No voice from heaven answered him. But as he knelt there, a sense of peace slowly settled over him like a blanket. He didn't know if Aiko was alive. He didn't know if Kameda was telling the truth. But he knew he had to keep going, one step at a time, doing what was right in front of him. That was faith. Not knowing the path ahead, but walking it anyway. For 2 days, the typhoon lashed the camp. The wind howled like a wounded animal, bending trees and tearing at the roof. Rain fell in sheets so thick, it was hard to see more than a few feet outside the windows. Inside, buckets caught the leaks, filling quickly and needing to be emptied again and again. The storm had trapped them all inside together. The Japanese nurses, Elijah, Lieutenant Kameda, and the 3 refugees. Close quarters made for tense moments. Old fears and fresh griefs rubbed against each other like stones, making sparks of anger flare up before dying away again. On the evening of the 2nd day, when the wind had dropped a little, but the rain still pounded the roof, Elijah took out a battered harmonica he kept in his pocket. It had been with him through the war, a small comfort in dark times. He began to play softly, an old gospel song his mother used to sing while hanging laundry on summer mornings back in Kansas. The simple melody filled the room, somehow louder than the storm outside. Yuki came closer, drawn by the music. What song? She asked. It's called Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Elijah replied. It's about heaven coming to take us home. Teach us? Yuki asked, surprising him. Elijah looked around. The other women had also drawn nearer, even Fumiko. Only Kameda remained apart, sitting up in his bed, watching. All right, Elijah agreed. He sang the words slowly, then taught them the chorus. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Their voices were hesitant at first, the English words strange on their tongues. But soon, they grew more confident. Sister Midori had a clear, sweet voice that rose above the others. After they had sung it through several times, Keiko began to hum a different melody, a Japanese lullaby her mother had sung to her. The 2 songs should have clashed, but somehow they wove together, creating something new and beautiful. For a little while, they forgot their fears and differences. The music bound them together in a way words could not. Even Lieutenant Kameda seemed affected. He sat silent, his face turned toward the wall. But when Elijah glanced over, he saw tears mixing with the rainwater that had blown in through a crack in the window. That night, they shared stories as the storm raged. Elijah told them about growing up in Kansas, about the wheat fields that stretched like golden oceans, about his mother's cooking and his father's quiet strength. The women spoke of their homes in Japan, cherry blossoms in spring, festival lanterns in summer, the comfort of family gatherings around the kotatsu in winter. Will you go back? Elijah asked them. If we can, Sister Midori said. Japan will need healing after this war. As will all of us, Fumiko added, her usual harshness softened. Kameda spoke suddenly from his corner. There may be no home to return to. I heard Tokyo burns, many cities destroyed. A somber silence fell. The reality of their world, broken, burning, forever changed, pressed in on them again. Then we build new homes, Sister Midori said firmly. New lives. How? Yuki asked, her young face troubled. How do we start again? One brick at a time, Elijah said. One day at a time. Together. As he spoke, the rain began to ease. The constant drumming on the roof softened to a gentle patter, then stopped altogether. In the sudden silence, they heard a new sound, boots sloshing through mud outside. Elijah grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. In the gray light of dawn, he saw men approaching, a dozen or more, wearing a mix of civilian clothes and parts of different uniforms. Some wore American helmets. Their faces were Filipino. Guerrillas, Elijah whispered. Fear rippled through the room. These men were not regular army. They were fighters who had suffered under Japanese occupation, men with deep wounds and long memories. What do we do? Keiko asked, clutching Yuki's hand. Elijah looked at Sister Midori, then at Kameda, then at the refugees huddled in the corner. They were all looking to him now, waiting for his decision. He took a deep breath and set his rifle aside. From a drawer, he pulled a white cloth, a pillowcase, clean and bright. We talk to them, he said. We show them we're not enemies. Before anyone could stop him, Elijah stepped outside, the white cloth held high above his head. Elijah's boots sank into the mud as he walked slowly toward the approaching men. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his movements calm. The white cloth fluttered in the morning breeze above his head. The guerrilla fighters stopped about 20 yards away. Their weapons, a mix of American rifles, Japanese pistols, and farming tools turned deadly, were pointed at him. Their faces were hard, etched with years of suffering under occupation. American, Elijah called out, United States Army. A tall man stepped forward from the group. He wore a battered American helmet and had a pistol holstered at his side. His face was deeply lined, his eyes sharp and calculating. You are far from your unit, American, he said in heavily accented English. Yes, sir, Elijah replied. Got separated in an ambush. These folks have been helping me recover. The man studied him, taking in his uniform, his dark skin, the bandages visible beneath his torn sleeve. After a long moment, he nodded and turned to his men, speaking rapidly in Tagalog. They lowered their weapons, though their eyes remained wary. I am Captain Lazo, the man said, turning back to Elijah. We fight Japanese for 3 years now. He tapped the American helmet. Your country's supplies, our blood. I appreciate what you've done, Captain, Elijah said sincerely. The war's over now. Emperor surrendered. We heard it on the radio. Lazo's face showed no joy at this news. War not over until all Japanese gone from our islands. A chill ran down Elijah's spine. These are civilians, Captain. Nurses and patients. You welcome us inside? Lazo asked, glancing past Elijah to the hospital building. Elijah hesitated, thinking of Kameda lying wounded within. But refusing would only make things worse. Of course, he said, forcing a smile. You're welcome to come in. We don't have much food, but we can offer some hot tea. Lazo signaled his men, and they moved forward. Elijah turned and led them toward the hospital, praying silently with each step. Inside, Sister Midori stood waiting, her back straight, her face composed despite her fear. The other women huddled behind her, while Kameda had been hidden beneath blankets in the corner, made to look like bundles of laundry. Welcome, Sister Midori said in English, bowing slightly. Lazo did not return the courtesy. His eyes scanned the room, noting the Japanese faces, the meager supplies, the signs of long hardship. We hunt Japanese stragglers, he announced, those who hide in jungle rather than surrender. There are no soldiers here, Sister Midori said. Only nurses and patients. Lazo's eyes narrowed. We will see. My men will search camp. Before anyone could object, the guerrillas spread out. They moved through the small hospital, opening doors, looking under beds, checking closets. Their boots tracked mud across the clean floors that Yuki had scrubbed just the day before. Elijah stood by Sister Midori, his body tense. It's going to be okay, he whispered, though he wasn't sure it was true. A shout came from the back room. One of Lazo's men emerged, dragging Kameda by his collar. The Japanese officer was pale with pain, the bandage on his side spotted with fresh blood from the rough handling. "Captain, Japanese officer," the man called in Tagalog. Lazo's face darkened with anger. He turned to Elijah and Sister Midori. "You hide enemy from us?" "He's wounded," Elijah said firmly. "No threat to anyone. All Japanese threat," Lazo spat. "This man," he pointed at Kameda, "his kind killed my wife, my son, burned my village." "Not all Japanese are the same," Elijah argued. "Just like not all Americans are the same. Not all Filipinos." But Lazo wasn't listening. He barked orders to his men, who dragged Kameda outside despite his weak struggles. "What are you doing?" Elijah demanded, following them. Lazo turned, his hand on his pistol. "Justice. He die at dawn. For my family. For all families." Elijah looked at Kameda, kneeling in the mud. The Japanese officer met his gaze, a strange calmness in his eyes. He seemed to have expected this, perhaps even welcomed it. But Elijah couldn't let it happen. Whatever Kameda had done, killing him now, like this, wasn't justice. It was revenge. "No," Elijah said, stepping between Lazo and Kameda. "I won't let you execute a wounded man." Lazo's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. "You defend Japanese after what they do?" "I defend what's right," Elijah said steadily. "The war's over. Let it be over here too." For a tense moment, Elijah thought Lazo might shoot them both. But then the guerrilla leader stepped back, contempt on his face. "Dawn," he repeated. "He dies at dawn. You stay out of the way, or you die too." He turned and walked away, his men following. They set up camp at the edge of the clearing, building small fires despite the damp. Kameda was thrown back into the hospital, landing heavily on the floor. Elijah helped him to his bed. "Why?" Kameda asked weakly. "Why defend me?" Elijah had no simple answer. Instead, he said, "Rest. We'll figure something out." Night fell over the camp like a heavy blanket. Outside, the guerrillas' fires burned orange against the darkness. Inside, voices were kept to whispers as they discussed what to do. "We cannot let them kill him," Sister Midori insisted. "It would be murder." "He's Japanese military," Fumiko pointed out. "He must have done terrible things." "Haven't we all?" Midori asked softly. "In war?" Elijah paced the small room, thinking hard. "There's a cellar beneath the east ward, right? Where you stored medicines?" Yuki nodded. "Yes, but it's very small and damp." "Better than dead," Elijah said grimly. "We need to hide him there until we can figure something out." Keiko wrung her hands nervously. "But how? They watch the building." Sister Midori moved to the window and looked out at the guerrillas' camp. Then she turned, a determined look on her face. "We will distract them." An hour later, Sister Midori approached Captain Lazo's fire. She carried a small pot of tea and a plate with their last few rice balls. "For your men," she said, bowing slightly. "You have traveled far today." Lazo looked suspicious, but the smell of the tea, enhanced with their last precious herbs, was too tempting to resist. He nodded curtly. As Midori served the tea, the other women emerged from the hospital. They began to sing, a Japanese lullaby at first, which made the guerrillas tense. But then they smoothly transitioned into the gospel song Elijah had taught them. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." Their clear voices rose in the night air. Several of the guerrillas, who had been baptized Catholics before the war, recognized the spiritual nature of the song even if they didn't understand the words. They relaxed slightly. Sister Midori began to tell stories from the Bible in simple English that Lazo could understand. The parable of the Good Samaritan, the story of the prodigal son, tales of forgiveness and second chances. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Elijah and Yuki quickly moved Kameda to the small cellar. The Japanese officer was barely conscious, his fever having returned. "You better be worth the mercy I'm spending," Elijah muttered, as they lowered him into the damp space beneath the floorboards. "I am not," Kameda whispered, "but I thank you anyway." Elijah covered him with a blanket, then closed the trapdoor and dragged a heavy cabinet over it. They arranged bandages and supplies to make it look like a wounded man still lay in the bed. When Captain Lazo eventually stormed back to his tent, frustrated by Sister Midori's only Yuki sat nearby, keeping watch at the window. Static filled the air, then suddenly cleared. A voice came through, American, official. Repeat, Allied POW recovery teams are being deployed throughout Luzon sector. Any personnel with knowledge of civilian or military prisoners should report to nearest command post. Medical supplies are being airdropped to marked positions. Humanitarian aid. Elijah's heart leaped. Help was coming. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it was coming. If they could just hold on a little longer. He found a pencil and a scrap of paper and began to write. Dear Mama, I pray this finds you well. I'm alive and mostly whole, though I've seen things I never thought I'd see. I hope to be home soon, but first I have to tell you about some remarkable people I've met. He wrote about Sister Midori and her quiet strength, about Yuki's gentle hands healing his wounds, about Keiko's cleverness with their meager supplies, even about Fumiko's fierce protectiveness of the others despite her sharp tongue. They've shown me that goodness doesn't have a flag or a uniform. It lives in the heart. I think Daddy would have understood that. He didn't mention Kamado or the gorillas. No need to worry his mother with dangers he hoped would soon be past. As dawn light filtered through the windows, Sister Midori gathered everyone for morning scripture reading. Her Bible fell open to a passage from Matthew. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Elijah tucked his letter inside his shirt pocket, planning to mail it once he rejoined his unit. He stepped outside to check on the guerrillas' camp, hoping they might have left during the night. No such luck. They were already up, building their cooking fires, checking their weapons. One man looked up and saw Elijah. Their eyes met across the yard. Then something hard struck the back of Elijah's head, and the world went black. Pain throbbed through Elijah's skull as consciousness slowly returned. He tried to move his arms but couldn't. Opening his eyes, he discovered he was tied to a post in the center of the campyard. The sun was just clearing the treetops, its golden light making him squint. Captain Lazo stood before him, face hard as stone. Behind him, the women from the hospital were being held at gunpoint by several guerrillas. Sister Midori was trying to reason with them, but Lazo wasn't listening. You betray us, Lazo said to Elijah. Hide enemy. Lie to us. I was protecting an injured man, Elijah replied, his mouth dry with fear. Japanese kill thousands. They deserve no protection. Elijah could see the pain behind Lazo's anger, the loss of his family, his home, years of fighting and suffering. But that didn't make this right. The war is over, Elijah said again. Killing him won't bring your family back. Silence! Lazo struck him across the face. You are traitor to your uniform. Sister Midori broke free from her guard and rushed forward. Please, he acted out of compassion, as Christ taught us. Lazo pushed her roughly aside. Your Christ did not see what Japanese do to my country. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the morning air. Everyone turned. Lieutenant Kameda stood in the hospital doorway, swaying on his feet, a pistol in his hand. He must have crawled from his hiding place when he heard the commotion. Let them go, he said in English. Your quarrel is with me. Lazo's men raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Kameda collapsed, the gun falling from his hand. In the confusion, one of the guerrillas knocked over a lantern. Flames leaped up the dry wooden wall of the hospital. Fire! Yuki screamed. Smoke billowed as the flames spread quickly, fed by the morning breeze. The guerrillas scattered, some running for water, others simply backing away from the growing inferno. Elijah strained against his ropes. A small figure darted toward him. Little Lena, the refugee child. She had a kitchen knife in her hand. With surprising determination, she sawed at his bindings until they gave way. Free at last, Elijah ran toward the burning building. Inside, patients were crying out in fear. He found an unconscious nurse, Keiko, overcome by smoke, and carried her outside to safety. Then he went back for others. The fire spread to the roof, which began to collapse in sections. Elijah helped the last patient out just as a burning beam crashed down behind him. Sister Midori was organizing the evacuees, counting heads to make sure everyone was safe. Lazo and his men had retreated to the edge of the clearing, watching the destruction they had caused with mixed expressions of regret and satisfaction. "Kameda?" Elijah asked, coughing from the smoke. "There," Midori pointed. The Japanese officer lay on the ground where he had fallen. Elijah checked his pulse. Weak, but there. Together they dragged him farther from the flames. By the time the fire burned itself out, half the camp was destroyed. The main hospital building, the kitchen, and the storehouse were all gone. Only the small chapel and one storage shed remained untouched. Lazo approached as they huddled among the smoldering ruins. He looked at Kameda, then at Elijah, then at the crying women and frightened patients. Without a word, he turned and walked away. His men followed, disappearing into the jungle as silently as they had come. Elijah sank to his knees beside Sister Midori, his strength finally giving out. Ash drifted down around them like gray snow. Morning after the fire. The air still smelled of smoke, and ashes drifted on the breeze. The survivors gathered near the ruins of the chapel, which had lost its roof, but still had 4 walls standing. Elijah's shoulder was badly burned, the skin red and blistered. Sister Midori had bound it with their last clean bandages. No one had died in the fire, which seemed like a miracle. But their situation was desperate. Most of their supplies were gone. The radio had been destroyed, and the rainy season was coming. They could smell it in the air. "What do we do now?" Yuki asked, her voice small with exhaustion. Fumiko, for once, had no sharp answer. She just sat staring at the ruins of the place that had been their home and prison for so many months. Elijah looked at the faces around him. Japanese women, Filipino refugees, a wounded enemy officer. All looking to him for answers he didn't have. "We should try to reach Allied lines," he said finally. "Find help." Sister Midori shook her head. "Some cannot walk so far. Old Mr. Tanaka, Mrs. Ito, and now Lieutenant Kameda. They are too weak." "So we leave them?" Keiko asked, horrified. "No," Elijah said firmly. "We don't leave anyone behind." "Then what?" Fumiko demanded. "We sit here and wait to die?" Elijah had no answer. For the first time since he'd arrived at the camp, doubt overwhelmed him. What had it all been for? His search for Aiko, his efforts to help these women? It all seemed pointless now, as they sat among the ashes of their shelter. "God has abandoned us," he whispered, so quietly that only Sister Midori heard him. She looked at him sharply, then stood up. Without speaking, she walked to the edge of the burned area. There, she knelt and picked up a handful of ashes. She pressed them between her palms, then rose and walked back to Elijah. "From dust, he makes new hearts," she said, opening her hands to show the ash compacted into a small, heart-shaped form. "When all seems lost, that is when faith matters most." Elijah stared at the ash heart in her hands, then looked up at her face. There was no false cheer there, no empty optimism, just a quiet determination that somehow reached through his despair. He nodded slowly and got to his feet. "We need to build shelter before the rains come," he said. "Something basic, but enough to keep everyone dry." Sister Midori smiled, relieved to see his spirit return. Together, they began to lift fallen timbers that could still be used. The others joined them, even Kameda, who could only drag small pieces but insisted on helping. By evening, they had cleared enough space to create a rough shelter using the chapel walls and salvaged wood. It wasn't much, but it would keep the rain off their heads as darkness fell. Sister Midori led them in prayer. This time, everyone joined in, including Kameda. Their voices rose together in the simple words, "Our Father, who art in heaven." Different accents, different faiths, different sides of a bitter war, all united in one ancient prayer. Elijah felt something shift inside him as he listened to their mingled voices. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. A sense that as long as they could still pray together, still work together, still see each other as human beings worthy of dignity and care, then not all was lost. 2 days passed. The makeshift shelter was improved with each passing hour. Everyone worked, even the children and the elderly, doing what they could. Scraps of metal from the roof became tools. Broken furniture was repurposed as supports. Cloth that had survived the fire was stretched to create walls. Elijah's burn was healing, though it still pained him. Sister Midori had found some aloe plants growing near the edge of the camp, and their cool gel brought blessed relief. "We need more water," Yuki announced on the morning of the 3rd day. Their small supply barrel was nearly empty. "And we should check if any Allied patrols have come through the area," Elijah added. It was decided that Elijah and Yuki would take their cart, miraculously spared by the fire, and follow the track down to the river. They might find news there, or at least fresh water and perhaps some fish. The day was hot and humid as they set out, Elijah pulling the cart while Yuki walked alongside. The muddy track wound through fields of tall grass, then into a stand of trees. Birds called overhead, and insects buzzed around them. "It almost feels like a normal day," Yuki said, her face brightening in the sunshine. "Like before the war." Elijah smiled. "Were you a nurse before the war too?" She nodded. "Yes, but in a big hospital in Osaka, with real medicines and clean sheets." She sighed. "It seems like another life now." "You'll get back there," Elijah assured her. "Japan will rebuild." "What about you?" she asked. "What will you do when the war is really over?" Elijah considered this. He hadn't thought much beyond finding Aiko and getting home to Kansas. Finish school, maybe. "I was studying radio engineering when the war came." "You would be good at that," Yuki said. "You have careful hands." They reached the river to find that the bridge had been washed away in the recent storms. The water rushed brown and swollen between the banks. "No crossing here," Elijah said, frowning. "We'll have to fill our barrels and head back." As Yuki began dipping their containers into the clearer water near the edge, Elijah scanned the area. In the distance, he could hear the faint thump of artillery. Allied forces still clearing out pockets of resistance, perhaps. A sound closer by caught his attention, a frightened bleating. He followed it to find a young goat trapped in a tangle of vines and debris from the flood. The poor creature was exhausted from struggling. "Hey there, little fella," Elijah said softly. "You're in a real fix, ain't you?" He carefully freed the goat, checking for injuries. Finding none, he lifted the small animal into his arms. It trembled against his chest, but didn't try to escape. "Look what I found," he called to Yuki. She turned, and her face lit up with delight. "A goat! Milk for the children!" "If it's a she-goat," Elijah laughed. "Let's check." "Yep, we're in luck." They put the goat in the cart, along with the water barrels. It was the first time Elijah had heard Yuki laugh freely, without fear or restraint. The sound warmed him more than the sunshine. As they started back toward camp, Elijah looked up at the sound of distant engines. Across the western sky, parachutes were drifting down like dandelion seeds on the wind. "Supply drops," he said, his heart leaping. "The Allies are getting closer." "How long until they reach us?" Yuki asked, hope making her voice tremble. "Hard to say. Maybe days, maybe weeks." Elijah squinted at the distant parachutes. "But they're coming. That's what matters." The goat bleated as if in agreement. Yuki laughed again, and this time Elijah joined her. For a moment, they weren't nurse and soldier, Japanese and American. Just two young people sharing a moment of unexpected joy in a world that had given them too little of it. As they walked back toward camp, Elijah found himself humming "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." Yuki joined in, her voice blending with his in perfect harmony. That evening, As stars appeared in a sky washed clean by afternoon rain, Lieutenant Kameda requested to speak with Elijah and Sister Midori privately. They gathered near the small fire outside their makeshift shelter, the flames casting long shadows across their faces. Kameda sat up straight despite his pain. The fever had left his eyes clear and determined. "I must go," he said simply. "Tomorrow before dawn." "Go where?" Elijah asked. "You can barely walk." "To find Allied lines," Kameda replied. "To bring help." Sister Midori shook her head. "You are not strong enough." "No one is strong enough," Kameda said, "but someone must go." He looked directly at Elijah. "I know these jungles. I know where patrols move, and—" he hesitated. "I have nothing to lose." Elijah understood what remained unsaid. As a Japanese officer, Kameda's future was uncertain at best. Prisoner of war camps awaited most Japanese soldiers. Some would face trials for war crimes. "Why would you help us?" Elijah asked, echoing the question Fumiko had once asked him. Kameda's gaze dropped to the fire. "I have done terrible things, things I cannot speak of." His voice was barely above a whisper. "But here, I have seen something I thought was lost in this war. Mercy, honor. I cannot undo what I have done, but perhaps I can do this one good thing before the end." Sister Midori touched the cross at her neck. "No sin is beyond forgiveness, Lieutenant." "Perhaps God forgives," Kameda said, "but I cannot ask the dead to forgive." Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant calls of night birds. Finally, Kameda turned to Elijah. "I ask your forgiveness," he said formally, "for what I could not prevent, for your sister's convoy." Elijah felt a tightness in his chest. He thought of Aiko, whether she was alive or dead, whether she had suffered. He thought of all the hatred he'd carried, not just for Kameda, but for everyone on the other side of this war. Slowly, he extended his hand. "I don't know if I have the right to forgive you," he said honestly, "but I know holding on to hate won't bring Aiko back. It won't help anyone heal." Kameda hesitated, then reached out, their hands clasped under the lamplight. Dark skin against pale, enemy against enemy, both now simply men trying to find their way home. "I will bring help," Kameda promised, "or I will not return." Sister Midori nodded, accepting his decision. "Take food for 2 days, and bandages for your wound." Before dawn the next morning, Kameda prepared to leave. The women had given him their last rice balls and a canteen of water. Elijah provided a rough map drawn from memory, showing where he believed Allied forces might be found. Kameda had changed from his tattered uniform into simple civilian clothes, a farmer's shirt and pants, too big for his thin frame. Around his waist, he still wore his sword belt, the katana a part of him he could not leave behind. But now, a white cloth was tied to its handle, a flag of surrender, a plea for peace. "Go with God," Sister Midori said, pressing the small wooden cross from her neck into his hand. Kameda bowed deeply to her, then to Elijah. Without another word, he turned and limped into the jungle, his figure quickly swallowed by the pre-dawn darkness. Elijah watched him go, wondering if the Japanese officer would survive the journey, wondering if he would keep his promise. So much remained uncertain. Yet somehow, watching Kameda make this final act of courage gave Elijah a strange sense of peace. "Do you think he'll make it?" Sister Midori asked softly. "I don't know," Elijah admitted, "but I believe he'll try." Together they stood watching the spot where Kameda had disappeared until the first golden rays of sunrise touched the eastern sky. 3 days passed slowly. The rhythm of survival filled their hours, gathering what food they could, boiling water, tending to the sick, repairing their shelter. The little goat provided milk for the children, becoming a beloved pet who followed Elijah everywhere. Each morning, Elijah led prayers. Though he was no preacher like his uncle back in Kansas, he remembered enough Bible verses to offer comfort. The Japanese women and Filipino refugees sat together in a circle, heads bowed, finding common ground in faith when all else seemed lost. "The Lord is my shepherd," Elijah would begin. "I shall not want." And voices would join his, some in Japanese, some in Tagalog, some in halting English, all finding solace in ancient words. After prayers, everyone worked. Sister Midori organized the women into teams, some gathering food, others tending the sick, others keeping watch. Elijah hunted when he could, though game was scarce. He also worked to improve their defenses, still wary of Lazo's return. One morning, Elijah found Yuki and Keiko digging in a patch of scorched earth behind their shelter. "What are you planting?" he asked, kneeling beside them. "Vegetable seeds," Yuki explained. "Found them in storage shed. Beans, radish, cabbage. They might not grow in time to help us," Keiko added, "but someone will eat from them." Elijah was touched by this act of hope, planting seeds they might never see grow, creating life from the ashes of destruction. He joined them, his large hands gently pressing seeds into the dark soil. Later that day, Elijah taught them more English words. They sat in a circle, pointing to objects and repeating their names. Then, Sister Midori brought out paper and ink, saved from the fire. She showed Elijah how to write kanji characters. "This is hope," she said, drawing careful strokes. "Kibo." Elijah tried to copy it, his untrained hand making clumsy marks. The women giggled at his efforts, but their laughter was kind. Even Fumiko, who had once looked at him with such suspicion, now offered tips on how to hold the brush. "Like this," she demonstrated, gentle but firm. As the sun set on the third day since Kameda's departure, Elijah climbed to the highest point in the camp, a small hill where the watchtower had once stood. From there, he could see across the jungle canopy to the mountains beyond. Somewhere out there were Allied forces. Somewhere out there, perhaps, was Aiko. "Please, Lord," he prayed aloud, "guide Kameda to help, or guide help to us." Sister Midori joined him, her small figure casting a long shadow in the sunset. "You were worried?" she asked. "Trying not to be," Elijah admitted. "My mama always said, worry is just prayer facing the wrong direction." Midori smiled at this. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is," Elijah's voice softened with memory. "Raised 4 boys on her own after Daddy died. Never complained, though I know it was hard." "And she sent all her sons to war?" Elijah nodded. "My oldest brother died at Normandy. Next one lost his leg in Italy. Third brother still fighting in Europe, far as I know." Midori touched his arm gently. "And yet you can show kindness to enemies. That is rare strength." "Not strength," Elijah said. "Just doing what seems right, one step at a time." They stood in companionable silence, watching darkness claim the land. Stars appeared, one by one, like distant campfires in the heavens. Midori pointed up. "In Japan, we have story about stars. They are holes in the floor of heaven, letting light shine through." Elijah smiled. "I like that idea." As they turned to head back to camp, a distant sound caught their attention. Elijah froze, listening hard. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. The sound came again, a low mechanical hum from the west. Not the chattering of jungle insects or the call of birds. Not thunder. Engines. Vehicle engines. "Someone's coming," Elijah said, his heart suddenly racing. "Kameda?" Midori asked hopefully. "Maybe." Elijah stared intently into the gathering darkness. "Or maybe our prayers just got answered another way." Dawn broke clear and bright. Everyone in the camp was awake early, drawn by the excitement of Elijah's report. They had heard nothing more since the distant engine sounds the previous evening, but hope had taken root among them like the seeds in their small garden. Yuki climbed to the lookout point every hour, scanning the horizon for movement. The children played a game of who could spot a vehicle first, their thin faces animated with excitement for the first time in days. By mid-morning, they had almost given up. Perhaps Elijah had been mistaken. Perhaps the sound had been thunder after all, or some trick of the jungle acoustics. Then little Lena came running, her bare feet slapping against the hard earth. "Coming! They coming!" she cried in a mix of Tagalog and English. Everyone rushed to the road. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of vehicles. As they watched, the shapes became clear. 3 jeeps and a small truck, moving slowly along the rutted track. "American," Elijah confirmed, spotting the familiar olive-drab color of U.S. Army vehicles. "It's our people." The lead jeep flew an American flag that snapped in the breeze. A young lieutenant stood up in the passenger seat, his uniform crisp and clean, so unlike Elijah's tattered clothes. But what made Elijah's heart stop was the figure walking beside the jeep. One hand gripping the side for support. Even at a distance, he recognized Lieutenant Kameda's upright posture, the distinctive way he favored his wounded side. "He made it," Elijah breathed. "He actually made it." The convoy reached the edge of the camp and stopped. The lieutenant jumped down from his jeep and approached, looking curiously at the strange gathering before him. A black American soldier, Japanese nurses in torn uniforms, Filipino refugees, and a Japanese officer in civilian clothes, all standing together. "Corporal Elijah Booker, 93rd Infantry Division," Elijah said, saluting despite his ragged appearance. The lieutenant returned the salute automatically, his eyes wide with surprise. "Lieutenant James Wilson, 24th Infantry. We found your Japanese friend here 2 days ago, half dead on the trail. Said there were survivors needing evacuation." He glanced at the mixed group. "Didn't quite expect this." "It's been an unusual war, sir," Elijah said simply. Lieutenant Wilson nodded slowly. "So I see." He turned and called back to his men. "Medics, get up here." 2 medics jumped from the truck and began checking the refugees, especially the children and elderly. More soldiers approached cautiously, their weapons lowered but ready. They stared in open amazement at the scene, at Japanese women helping American medics, at Elijah standing protectively beside Sister Midori, at Kameda, barely standing but proudly upright. "How did this happen?" Wilson asked Elijah quietly. "The Japanese officer, the women, all of you together?" Elijah thought about all they had been through, the fear, the trust that grew slowly, the moments of grace amid destruction. How could he explain it? "We found something more important than which side we were on, sir," he said finally. "We found our common humanity." Wilson shook his head in wonder. Then he pulled a radio from his jeep and spoke into it. "Base, this is Wilson. We found something you'll want to see." Within days, the little camp was transformed. Army tents replaced the makeshift shelter. A field kitchen provided hot meals 3 times daily. Medics treated the sick with real medicine, not just prayers and hope. More soldiers arrived, then support staff. A week after the first jeeps, a journalist showed up with a photographer in tow. They were looking for uplifting stories to send back home, tales of heroism to balance the grim reports of kamikaze attacks and island fighting. What they found in the camp captivated them. They took photographs of everyone, Sister Midori tending patients, the women working in their vegetable garden, the little Filipino girl playing with the goat. But most of all, they photographed Elijah reading his letter to the women, his deep voice carrying across the yard as they listened attentively. "This is remarkable," the journalist said, scribbling notes. "A black American soldier and Japanese nurses helping each other survive, and a Japanese officer who risked his life to bring rescue." "Just folks being decent to each other," Elijah said, uncomfortable with the attention. "That's exactly what makes it news," the journalist replied. "Decency is rare enough these days." The story spread quickly among the Allied forces in the area. Soldiers began to visit, bringing small gifts, chocolate bars, canned fruit, fresh bread from their field kitchens. They would stand awkwardly at first, these men who had been fighting the Japanese for years, not sure how to act around enemy women who were suddenly not quite enemies anymore. But the women's quiet dignity and Elijah's friendly manner usually broke the ice. Soon, soldiers would be sitting cross-legged on the ground, attempting to learn Japanese phrases or teaching English ones, laughing at their mutual mistakes. One evening, as the setting sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and gold, a chaplain visited the camp. He brought his portable organ and set it up in the open area between the tents. "I heard you folks know some hymns," he said with a smile. Soon a crowd gathered. The women from the hospital, the refugee families, soldiers from nearby posts, even a few Filipino villagers who had returned to the area. Sister Midori started the singing with amazing grace, the hymn Elijah had taught them. As the music swelled, voices joined in different languages, but in perfect harmony. Japanese nurses sang beside American soldiers who weeks earlier might have shot them on sight. Filipino children who had lost parents to Japanese bombs held hands with Japanese women who had lost brothers to Allied bullets. In the back of the crowd, Kameda sat quietly. His wounds were healing, but his future remained uncertain. As a Japanese officer, he would eventually face detention, perhaps worse. Yet for now, he too was part of this unlikely community. Elijah stood with Sister Midori as they sang the final verse. Watching the gathering, faces glowing in the sunset light, voices raised together, he felt a sense of wonder. In the midst of the worst war the world had ever seen, they had created a small miracle. As the singing ended, a messenger approached Elijah with an official-looking envelope. "Message for you, Corporal," the young private said, saluting. Elijah opened it with trembling fingers, quickly scanning the typed words. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled everyone. "Aiko!" he cried. "My sister, she's alive! Manila General Hospital!" Sister Midori rushed to his side, her face alight with shared joy. "When can you go to her?" "Transport leaves tomorrow morning," Elijah said, his voice choked with emotion. "They've arranged everything." That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He sat outside his tent, looking up at the stars through Midori's holes in the floor of heaven. His heart was too full for sleep, full of gratitude, of relief, of the strange mixture of joy and sorrow that comes at the end of a long journey. He would find Aiko tomorrow, but he would leave behind these people who had become a different kind of family to him. People who had saved him not just from death, but from the hatred war breeds in human hearts. "Thank you," he whispered to the stars, "for walking me into that camp." 3 weeks after Lieutenant Wilson's convoy had arrived at the camp, Elijah stood before the small gathering of women. His uniform was clean and pressed now, his boots polished. His wounds had healed, leaving only scars to remind him of how close he had come to death. "I guess this is goodbye," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The women had prepared for his departure. Each had made him a small gift, Keiko, a letter in careful English, Fumiko, a pouch of tea leaves she had dried herself, Yuki, a drawing of the camp as it had been before the fire. Even little Lena had given him a smooth stone she'd found, shaped like a heart. Sister Midori stepped forward. In her hands was a small cloth crane, sewn from scraps of their uniforms, white from her nurse's apron, green from his army fatigues. "For luck," she said, placing it in his palm, "to guide you home." Elijah closed his fingers gently around it. "I'll never forget any of you," he promised. "What we did here, it matters. It shows what's possible." "Will you come back to Japan someday?" Yuki asked, "when the war is truly over?" "I hope to," Elijah said. "I'd like to see your cherry blossoms in spring." "And you will bring your sister?" Sister Midori asked. "Yes, ma'am. Aiko would want to meet you all." The truck that would take him to Manila honked its horn impatiently. It was time to go. Elijah embraced each woman in turn. Some cried openly. Others maintained their composure, though their eyes shone with unshed tears. When he reached Sister Midori, he found he had no words. Instead, he simply bowed, Japanese style, showing his profound respect. She bowed in return, then reached up to touch his cheek gently. "God go with you, Elijah Booker. And with you, Sister Midori Tanaka." The journey to Manila took most of the day. The truck bounced over rutted roads, through villages reduced to rubble, past fields where farmers were already replanting crops. Everywhere, Elijah saw the same thing: destruction being slowly covered by new growth, nature healing the scars of war, people rebuilding from the ashes. Other soldiers in the truck tried to engage him in conversation, but Elijah was lost in thought. He watched the landscape pass, thinking about all he had seen and learned. The truck stopped occasionally to navigate around bomb craters or collapsed bridges. Each time, Filipino children would run up to the soldiers, begging for candy or gum. Elijah gave what he could from his rations, remembering little Lena's shy smile. As the day wore on, he pulled out the cloth crane Sister Midori had given him. Its simple beauty moved him. Two enemies' uniforms stitched together to create something new, something that could fly above the battlefields. "Nice souvenir," commented the soldier beside him. "From a girlfriend?" "No," Elijah replied. "From a friend, a true friend." The sun was setting as they reached Manila. The city had been heavily damaged in the fighting. Buildings stood as empty shells, their walls pocked with bullet holes. Streets were lined with rubble. Military vehicles and personnel were everywhere, working to restore order and basic services. Manila General Hospital was one of the few buildings relatively intact. Its white walls glowed orange in the sunset as the truck pulled up to the entrance. A nurse led Elijah through crowded hallways. Wounded soldiers, American, Filipino, even some Japanese, lay in beds lining the corridors. Medical staff hurried past, their faces drawn with exhaustion. They reached a ward on the 3rd floor. The nurse pointed to a bed by the window. "She's there." Elijah approached slowly. The young woman in the bed was thin, her face pale against the white pillow. Her black hair had been cut short, and a bandage wrapped around her forehead. But when she turned at the sound of his footsteps, her eyes, their father's eyes, lit with recognition. "Elijah?" she whispered. He was at her side in 2 strides, kneeling beside the bed, taking her hand in his. "Aiko, oh thank God." She reached up to touch his face, as if making sure he was real. "They told me you were coming, but I couldn't believe it." "How did you find me?" Elijah smiled through his tears. "That's a long story, little sister. One I'll tell you when you're stronger." "I'm plenty strong now," she insisted, trying to sit up. "Been in this bed too long already." He gently eased her back against the pillows. "Rest. I'm not going anywhere." Aiko studied his face. "You look different. Older." "I feel older," he admitted. "Seen things I never thought I'd see." "Me too." Her expression darkened with memories. "The convoy. The attack. I thought I was going to die out there in the jungle." "But you didn't," Elijah said firmly. "And neither did I. We're both here. We made it." She squeezed his hand. "When can we go home? To Kansas?" "Soon as you're well enough to travel. Mama's waiting for us." They talked until Aiko's eyelids grew heavy. Elijah watched her sleep, his heart full. Outside the window, Manila lay in darkness, with only scattered lights showing where life continued amid the destruction. He took out the cloth crane and placed it on her bedside table. It seemed to glow in the dim light, its wings poised for flight. "We're going home," he whispered. "All of us." Months later, under a sky so blue it hurt the eyes, Elijah and Aiko stood before the rebuilt chapel. The simple wooden building gleamed with fresh paint, its cross standing tall against the tropical sky. Where ruins had been, flowers now bloomed. Where ashes had covered the ground, grass grew green and lush. "It's smaller than I imagined," Aiko said, looking around the camp that Elijah had described to her so many times during her recovery. "But bigger in spirit," Elijah replied. They had come back to visit, traveling from Manila, where Aiko now worked as a translator for the occupation forces. Her health had returned fully, though she still walked with a slight limp, a reminder of her ordeal that would likely never fade. Sister Midori came out to greet them, her face breaking into a wide smile. She looked younger somehow, the strain of war lifted from her shoulders. Behind her followed the other women, fewer now, as some had been repatriated to Japan, but Yuki and Fumiko remained, helping to run the small clinic that had replaced the burned hospital. "You came," Midori said, embracing first Elijah, then Aiko. "I prayed you would." "Couldn't leave without saying a proper goodbye," Elijah said. "We ship out next week, back to the States." "And this must be Aiko," Midori said, studying the young woman with obvious delight. "Your brother spoke of you so often." Aiko bowed respectfully. "Thank you for saving my brother's life, for showing him kindness when many would not." "He saved us too," Yuki piped up, coming forward to take Aiko's hands in her own. "In many ways." They were led inside the chapel, where benches had been arranged for a special service. To Elijah's surprise, a familiar figure sat in the back row, Lieutenant Kameda, now in civilian clothes, his face thinner, but his posture still military straight. Their eyes met, and Kameda rose, bowing deeply. Elijah crossed the room and extended his hand. They shook in silence, no words needed between them. The service was simple but profound. Sister Midori read from scripture in both Japanese and English. They sang together, Amazing Grace, and a Japanese hymn that Aiko knew from childhood. The little chapel filled with their voices, which seemed to make the walls expand to contain such joy. Then Midori spoke, her English careful but clear. "Mercy is not the end of war," she said. "It is the beginning of peace." "When Corporal Booker came to our gate, we could have turned him away. When he found Lieutenant Kameda wounded, he could have left him to die. When the guerrillas threatened us, we could have surrendered to fear." She looked around at the gathered faces, Japanese, American, Filipino, all nodding in understanding. "Instead, we chose mercy, again and again. And here is the miracle. Mercy multiplied. It grew beyond our small camp. The soldiers who came to rescue us saw what we had built together. They told others. Now, this place is known throughout the region as a place of healing. Not just for bodies, but for hearts." Elijah felt Aiko's hand slip into his. Her eyes were bright with tears as she listened. She had heard his stories, but seeing the reality, the living proof that enemies could become friends, moved her deeply. After the service, they gathered outside for a simple meal. Food was still scarce, but they had prepared special dishes, rice balls, sweet potatoes, even a small cake made with precious sugar saved for the occasion. As they ate, they shared news. The women would stay to run the clinic until more permanent arrangements could be made. Some would eventually return to Japan. Others, like Sister Midori, felt called to remain in the Philippines, healing the wounds of war. "And you?" Midori asked Elijah. "What will you do in America?" "Finish school," he said firmly. "Radio engineering. Then maybe come back to these parts someday. Help rebuild what the war tore down." "You will always have a home here," she assured him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, they joined hands in a circle, former enemies, now bound by something stronger than the divisions that had once separated them. Sister Midori led them in a final prayer of blessing. Then Elijah, his deep voice steady and clear, began to sing one last time, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." One by one they all joined in, the words carrying across the evening air. In the chapel window, the cloth crane, the one Elijah had brought back with him, caught the last rays of sunlight, its wings glowing gold against the gathering darkness. As the singing ended, Elijah looked upward, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for walking me into that camp." And in that moment, surrounded by those who had become his family through the strange workings of war and mercy, Elijah Booker knew that some journeys never truly end. The road that had led him to the broken gate at dawn had become a path that would guide him for the rest of his life. A path of courage, forgiveness, and amazing grace.